Welcome to the story of Millie Salmon and the Infinite Shop. This is Chapter 1, A Kind of Terrible Day. We get to meet Millie Salmon, her family, and follow her and her friends Reggie and Pats through a day at school. The story will be read by the author, me, Ray DeBicky. I'm going to read it like I read all sorts of stories out loud, so hopefully we get to have some fun with this. You can join Millie Salmon on Patreon or find more at milliesalmon.com. And you can follow this podcast and other stories on social media at Infinite Shop Limited. Chapter 1, A Kind of Terrible Day. Her name is Millie Salmon, she is 12 years old, and she's trying to stay invisible. Not one of those silly, I'm so unhappy no one can see me kinds of invisible. That's nonsense. But if she's not breathing or moving, that lumbering fool working his way down the hallway will not spot her. His arms are limply hanging a bit out from his side, like his shoulders don't fold all the way down, and he waddles back and forth with his knees locked. He is the searcher. He will not find her. Evan is a different story. The boy is under the table that has the long tablecloth and the fat base, where he is wrapped as so well he could be holding the tabletop up himself. You can't even see his feet. He also has the giggles, and it is possible from across the room to feel the laughter bottled up in the front of his face, inching toward the end of his nose to come out as one giant snort. The searcher stops in the hallway and turns away from Millie towards Evan. The searcher lifts up the tablecloth, revealing the boy with his hands cupped over his nose and mouth. Millie leaps from her hiding place and starts into the incantation that would render the searcher powerless. Blackened apples make us frown, cats on roofs bring out the hounds, falling upwards upside down, hide me, find me in your town. The searcher covers the distance from the table to Millie's hiding place in 2 steps, but Millie starts down the hall he had just abandoned. She gets to hide me before the searcher gets her. He puts a big hand across her back and she falls down dead. But Evan escapes from under the table and makes it to the base at the other end of the apartment. He is safe. Children, do you want to stop running in the house? Mom was using her important voice. It matched the overall tailored suit and bag look Mom had on for her day at the downtown office. They've played this game too many times. Dad had been out of work for too long. Dad straightened up and picked up Millie by her armpits. It's okay, dear. We were just experimenting with organic history, he said, making an exaggerated point of brushing her off before sending her back to her room to get dressed for school. Millie and Mom shot Dad the same look, but for different reasons. He retreated to scoop up the still giggling Evan, to drop into a booster seat at the kitchen counter. Mom kissed Dad and headed out the door to work. Millie went to her room and recovered a clean school uniform from the closet. Pants, shirt, tie quickly done, then loosened just enough. Vest over the top. She ran a comb through her hair, then tied the long, shiny, dark mane into a manageable and passable ponytail. She smoothed out the stragglers and redid the elastic hairband. On each arm went clusters of colorful charm bracelets, the only divergence the school uniform allowed. She opened her bag and started filling it. A couple books and a charged laptop, her drawing pad and pencil case. Clearing her desk, her phone binged with a message from school. Oh no. She sulked back into the kitchen and pulled up to the high counter in the island. Dad had a bowl of oatmeal ready with an assortment of toppings. 5 to be exact. Dad was reading about the balance of tastes and had taken to providing all 5 flavors at every meal. The brown sugar and apples could have been acceptable, but the soy sauce? Pickled lemon wedges were not, and she could not muster enough hate for the indescribably hot red sauce that had taken permanent position on the counter. She poked at the bowl full of naked oatmeal, hoping it would crawl away and save her from the next thing. Evan wore a wide beard of oatmeal and was chewing on a pickled lemon. Dad took notice of the dark cloud at the end of his kitchen. I thought we were having a good morning. Any reason you're being surly all of a sudden? You just got a message. I did. Dad flipped his phone over and hit the notification with his pinky. He read it, initially worried about the message, and then delighted. Friday's a big sale. Awesome. I would like Mom to make our contribution this time. Dad opened his jaw, then closed it. He opened it again before closing it again. He was chewing over his next word. It was not unlike the gnawing required for his last bake sale submission. It's not that turmeric lychee squares were bad. That's not true. They were bad and almost inedible, and when all the other plates at the bake sale table were empty, the plate from the Salmon family stood, proudly labeled, and completely full. The price, most embarrassingly, had been crossed through several times before finally, mercifully, being replaced with free. She had to carry the full plate home. Dad looked at Millie's seriousness and deflated a little bit. We'll talk this over with Mom and see what she wants to do. Now try to finish your breakfast. Do you want some? No, 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 thank you, she said very quickly. She dug back into the steaming cereal, finishing most of the bowl without any strange additions. Getting used to this family for anyone else would be fatal. Millie put herself together and started towards school. Dad waited sentinel next to the door, holding Evan. You know, I have a recipe for ginger rutabaga cookies that we could. No, no. Can we talk to Mom first? She pleaded. Dad sighed, kissed the girl on the head, and pushed her out the door to school. Millie stomped down the 3 flights of stairs and out to the street. It was a busy morning. The sun was bright and it smelled like exhaust in autumn. She drove her hands into her pockets and started the march to Reggie's. For a block and a half, she walked alone, building up a deeper rage by digging further into all the things she wanted to say to her father. She did not like his advanced and purposeful weirdness. It was like he didn't want to be normal. He didn't want to work. He didn't want to spend the day doing anything but cooking weird things and babysitting other people's kids, like Evan. Millie got pushed out to school every morning with semi-radioactive waste for lunch. She forgot to check and see what pathogen appeared in her lunch bag this morning. She was so furious that she blasted straight past the steps and the waiting boy. Reggie took a second to realize she was not stopping and had to speed into a trot in order to catch up with her. He circled around and started walking backwards to face her. Millie was a locomotive pushing down the sidewalk. Millie! Morning, Millie! Millie! Good morning! He talked to her forehead. She stopped and looked up, then gave a sideways sigh for completely losing herself in irritation. Morning, Reggie, she said, with a little too much groan. Her head dropped a bit further into her shoulders, and she sunk a bit lower overall. You don't seem happy. Dad was... She looked at Reggie. He was grinning like a puppy that just caught its tail. He wanted to tell her something that was making him ecstatically happy, and wasn't going to listen to her complaining anyway. I stubbed my toe on a walrus. How are you? She started walking again, and Reggie fell in line beside her. Awesome! I went into your grandpa's bookstore and got my newest copy of Vacuum Bubbles. It was the biannual crossover edition featuring characters from at least 3 different comics, or at least 3 comics that I could find, but I'm sure there are more because there are a couple of characters that I had never seen before, and I'll have to go back to the bookstore to see if there are more back issues or if there are different comics that I can start looking at and find the histories. But anyway, there's this tremendous pull-out center panel of characters that I could draw without having all of these different comics open and spreading out all over the living room. She saw how happy Reggie was and felt a bit dumb. It wasn't a terrible day, just something. Dad was aggressively weird, but that allowed some things to slide, and people weren't right when Millie walked into school in a snit. She took a deep breath and tried to exhale the irritation. It worked a little. She breathed again. Feeling the city living around her and sensing a day of interesting people to draw and good potential as subjects for art. This worked. I am very happy that Grandpa could help you. Where did you get the cash? Some great uncle died and they sent some money to Mom. She said I could get a few bucks each week, but the rest was going into the bank. Lucky. I need a great uncle to kick off. I met this uncle a few times. He never got up from his horrible red leather chair that had gold buttons going all the way around the outside edge. He lived with my grandparents, and their house always smelled like boiled carrots and cat pans. Have you ever met one of your great uncles? Millie thought about it for a minute. I haven't even met a regular uncle. As far as I know, it's just Mom, Dad, and Grandpa. Millie spent her morning at school debating whether it was more mind-numbing or boring. Middle school, in her view, was just an empty holding bin before high school that was filled with the weak echoes of fun things that might have happened in elementary school. Not really fun things, but things that would be fun if described by aliens or adults. Fortunately, most of her days of seventh grade were spent moving from class to class with Reggie and their friend Pats. Science didn't live up to the name at all, with the teacher, Miss Blitz, reading word for word from the textbook, including the quiz at the end of the chapter. When handed out the exact same quiz, Millie had to stifle a laugh. She finished the 20 questions, turned her paper, and sat quietly for 15 minutes with her head on her desk. Second period history was about the same, with the teacher, Miss Bonnyton, never sticking to whether she was teaching ancient history, American history, or memories of touring with an old rock band in the 1990s. The boys called the combination of morning teachers Airheads B&B. It was third period math that really dragged the day to a screeching halt. The topics were fine when they covered them the first time a couple years ago. Now the teacher was trying to beat the same thing into the slow kids' heads again. Neither Millie or Reggie was ever tagged as slow. Pats, however, hid behind puffy cheeks of baby fat. He was too round to be smart, too mismatched with freckles and coarse hair, and was treated like it. Millie never bought his stupid act, but didn't let on in front of teachers. Mrs. Hawkins accosted Pats. She put him on the fryer in front of math class every day. No matter how much he refused to answer a question, Hawkins never let him off the hook. He'd admit he didn't finish his homework, and Hawkins would talk about paying attention in class. He'd answer it wrong, and Hawkins would talk about how important completing homework was. He'd say he didn't pay attention to the question, and Hawkins would blabber on about right and wrong. Hawkins thought she was outmaneuvering him and wanted real effort from Pats. Pats simply didn't care and wanted the hawk to stop being, his words, a bitch. But their little daily wars would get to the other two, as Millie wanted Pats to show he wasn't stupid, and Reggie didn't like the focused attention from authority. Today, Hawkins asked someone to complete the formula, distributing factors from outside the parentheses. She didn't even ask for hands before calling on Pats. Pats didn't even fumble with an answer before telling her that he was thinking about samurai riding on grizzly bears. Hawkins huffed at how simply dumb the boy was and turned to the board. Before she even got the marker to the white surface, Pats had text messages from either side. Millie said, "What do you think you're doing?" Reggie said, "Samurai are so last year. Think cowboys riding basilisk." To Reggie, Pats wrote back, "Cowboys might tame the snake through their giant belt buckles, but they're wearing giant belt buckles." To Millie, Pats wrote back, "Being dumb." She couldn't argue this. He was fortified. So she wrote back, "Can I help?" "No." "Just answer her. You can." "No." "Please?" That got a look from Pats, but not for long. "No." And that was the end of arguing Pats out of his war on math class. Millie listened to the same lesson for the third time and finished her homework before the bell rang. Lunch was a blur. Millie sat at the end of the table and watched Reggie and the shorter, rounder Pats try to eke some deeper meaning out of a pair of comic books they pulled out of taped plastic bags. For some reason, Reggie adored superhero comics. Millie enjoyed the stories, but some of the art was so bad that it distracted her. The proportions are all wrong. The balloon chests, the tree trunk thick necks, and the women using their giant bubble butts to fight supervillains. Nobody has a risk of fighting boas that's as big around as their thigh, she told Reggie. Well, Manhole does. He's from the future, so maybe we've evolved to look like that. Anyway, that's why he's a superhero and all the small-wristed people are not. Pats could not get enough of bloodlust, but Millie found vampires and werewolves completely insufferable. The art was much better in this one, mostly black and white with little spurts of red here and there. It was made with love, Pats would say. Reggie couldn't get through the first 3 pages without getting creeped out. Millie stuck with her love of the comic Leaf, a modern retelling of Norse mythology. Its art was gorgeously colorful, perfectly flat watercolor. Unfortunately, the artist stopped making new ones, so Millie had to survive on fanfic and her own art of the characters, which she happily worked on when possible. She was doodling a hero pose for Thirst, a long-haired blonde woman with formidable hammer in hand. Reggie pointed out that Thirst's very formidable bosom was just like his superhero comics, to which Millie pointed out her clothes that fit. Millie saw past Reggie that a boy named Owen had just walked in the cafeteria with his lunch tray. She waved him over. "I have your picture," and handed him a rolled-up drawing, held shut with a hair tie. "Holy crap, that's amazing!" The drawing was Owen doing a massive trick on his bike in front of a packed arena. "It's better than I had in my head. I only described me and the bike. How did you decide on the stadium? That's what the ramp actually looks like." It seemed like something that would fit, and she described why such an amazing trick needed an audience. It made Owen feel even more inside the image. Owen offered Millie cash, his lunch, a week of homework copying, or anything from his bag of candy and treats Owen sold other students throughout the day. Millie waved off everything except a pack of cookies. "Thanks for letting me draw it. I'm glad you like it." Moving into the afternoon, the trio survived language arts. Mostly Millie finished her homework and then more homework from the morning classes. Her last class was art. With her left arm on the table and her nose close to the paper, she did a passable job on a large sheet that covered the top of her desk. Her pencil drawing of the ceramic chicken sitting on the table at the front of the room was good enough to warrant an "ooh" from Mr. Flan, the art teacher. "Wonderful work, Miss Salmon. Excellent penciling and shading. Would you like to move on to color?" "I think this would be best in black and white, Mr. Flan. I would like to touch up some of the points I'm not happy with." "A pure aesthetic perfectionist, please continue to work." He set the sheet back on her table and went over to bother someone else for the rest of class. Under the desk, she kept her drawing pad open on her lap, where he couldn't see it and she could draw without his pointy nose over her shoulder. If he liked what she did as a lefty, he could be blown away by her right-handed work. The best part of the day was after school. Millie walked with the boys across the street to music tutors. Pats played the clarinet but wanted to be on saxophone. Reggie played saxophone but wanted to be on drums. Millie sung and always wanted to sing. While the boys lugged their instruments off the shelves and into their tiny booths, Millie was absorbed by the swirl of hair and scarves and dangling jewelry while being ushered into a small performance space in the rear by Miss Collins. Of course, that broke down pretty quickly. Miss Collins would flourish her criticism with pointed references to places she had performed. "That tone would break the windows at the Kennedy Center. Clean up your enunciation. The Met will not hire you to mumble." "Where did I mumble?" Millie asked. "The words are, 'It's a long way to find out who you are,' not 'slong way to star.' Say the words." Millie did, without any tone. She shaped her lips to each letter and released them for every space between the words. "Say them again." Millie did. "And again." Millie did. And now for the tone. Miss Collins sang the line as she wanted to hear it, and Millie repeated. "And again, and again." Now they went through the song 3 times. Everything was in threes. Once for the student, once for the teacher, and once because the Lord smiles on musicians. And Miss Collins wanted the Lord's version to be your best. "Because it is for the Lord," she would say. Millie burned through the closing note on the last repetition like her voice would set fire to the curtains. Miss Collins smiled. Her half hour was up, and they had been productive. They had been practicing this song for a few weeks, so it was time for Miss Collins to hand over a new song she was to learn. "Thank your grandfather for this one, Miss Salmon. I got it from his shop. I hadn't remembered this song from years ago, and when I went in to look for some new practice material, the CD was right there on the shelf. He even had the sheet music." "I will, Miss Collins. See you on Wednesday." When they all finished, the boys met Millie outside the music studio. They had to share the morning slog to school with all the people pouring into buses and off to their offices. But for 2 glorious hours in the afternoon, they had this quarter of the city to themselves. Dad asked Millie to check in once right after school, and then let her go experience the living city, so long as she had a friend with her and her phone remained on. Be back by the time Mom gets home. He may have a redeeming quality after all. She was okay giving him one, but only one. Millie could range freely within 10 blocks of home. They had to be careful on Hudson Street because it was busy, but they were allowed to cross at the corners, like any sane person would do otherwise. There were plenty of fantastic places on the street to watch people go about their daily routine or sip coffee or have a late lunch. And if that wasn't enough, the bookstore and Grandpa were 10 steps around the corner. Books in big letters on the single window. The painted second-story books sign dangled over Barber Avenue, facing a coffee shop that was always packed and a fancier coffee shop that was always empty. School was the 6th block on the east side. 2 blocks closer was the main library. 2 blocks closer to the park was the Free Museum. There was a cheap movie theater right at the edge of the neighborhood. The librarians and curators and ticket takers all knew Millie by name. They also knew her father, and her father's phone number, and they regularly texted him to let him know that his lovely and courteous daughter had just safely come in the door or was on her way home. This afternoon was not a time for any of those inside things, even her grandfather's bookstore. It was clear and warm in a way that it gets when the weather is about to change, but you have 1 or 2 good days left. So they walked to the park, threw their packs in a pile, and climbed around on the playground. It was tag and it was running and it was fun because all the little kids were still at home for their naps. And it stayed somewhat amusing until Millie, the tallest of the 3, hit her head one too many times on the monkey bars and started to walk away. The other 2 didn't realize she was gone until she disappeared over the hill. It took them a minute to regroup and find her. Millie was just over the edge of the slope, overlooking the soccer fields and the little fishing pond with the dribbling fountain in the middle. The boys flopped down on either side and continued to argue the merits of their comic books and which parts should be filled by the people they know. They had made it to the particularly malformed and gravity-defying female characters who never seemed to find any clothing that fit well. Reggie started making the case it was a role for one of the high school gym teachers he heard his older brother once talk about when Pats blurted out, "You already said Millie should be the one wearing Polecat's tight-fitting bodysuit." Reggie laughed and then stopped and turned red. He dove across Millie to punch Pats in the head. Millie got caught in the melee, and the 3 of them tumbled down towards the fields. When they got to the bottom, they were laughing so hard it was very difficult to climb back to the top and roll down again, but they did it. From across the soccer fields, a man in a tie was walking home from a very difficult day at work. For no reason, he looked into the park and spotted the 3 kids rolling down the hill and laughing uncontrollably. A smile broke across the man's face, and for a second, he forgot about the very important report that was due tomorrow. He quietly thanked those kids he never knew and never would know. It reminded him of a song from a long time ago, and the urge came over him to stop and see if that second-hand book and music shop was still in the neighborhood. Behold, it was. Same old man, same dusty shelves. Like he was in a trance, the man in the tie found the album he was trying to remember. In a reverie, he paid and read the liner notes on the walk home. The man took off his tie, kissed his family, and that night his young sons learned that he could sing. This was Millie Salmon in the Infinite Shop, Chapter 1, A Kind of Terrible Day. In the next episode, Millie finds out that Grandpa's bookstore is a little more than she knew. Thank you for listening. You can find more about Millie Salmon at milliesalmon.com or join us on Patreon. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review on whichever podcast app you use. Millie Salmon in the Infinite Shop is a production of Infinite Shop Limited, which you can follow on all social media platforms. I'm Ray Dubicki. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to reading some more for you soon.